Israel and the Hamas terrorist organization has spread far and wide in the Middle East, with pro-Iranian terrorist organizations joining the clashes across the region. In addition to the pro-Iranian Hamas and Hezbollah, the Houthi terrorist organization in Yemen has come to the forefront in recent days. If you remember, the Houthis had recently seized a car transport ship, the Galaxy Leader, belonging to a Japanese company in the Red Sea coast off of Yemen, which they thought was linked to Israel. Although the U.S. Navy has a strong presence in these areas, it was reported that the pro-Iranian Houthi terrorist organization attempted to seize an Israeli-linked ship in the Gulf of Aden after the attempt to hijack the Galaxy Leader. U.S. Central Command announced that the destroyer USS Mason, part of the Eisenhower Aircraft Carrier Strike Group, responded to an emergency call from a commercial tanker seized by armed attackers in the Gulf of Aden. The Liberian-flagged tanker carrying phosphoric acid was identified by the ship's company as Central Park. The ship was managed by Zodiac Maritime Limited, a London-based international ship management firm owned by Israel's Ofer family. Zodiac said that the vessel was owned by Klumvez Shipping Inc., but other records showed that Zodiac was the direct owner. London-based Zodiac Maritime is part of Israeli billionaire Eyal Ofer's Zodiac Group. British corporate records list two men with the surname Ofer as current and former directors of Klumvez Shipping, including Daniel Guy Ofer, who is also a director at Zodiac Maritime. So the Central Park was an Israeli-linked vessel sailing in the Gulf of Aden in the direction of Yemen. The Turkish captain's Central Park had a multinational crew of 22, including Russian, Vietnamese, Bulgarian, Indian, Georgian, and Filipino nationals. But the Central Park was seized by attackers in the Gulf. This terrorist act of hijacking the Central Park took place in part of the Gulf of Aden, theoretically under the control of government forces, far away from the Houthi-controlled areas of the country. The U.S. military reported that first, the USS Mason, with the assistance of Allied ships, demanded the release of the commercial vessel from the attackers. Later, 5 armed terrorists attempted to board the ship and fled in their small boat. The destroyer USS Mason pursued the 5 armed terrorists who hijacked the Central Park ship and tried to escape in small boats. After the pursuit by the U.S. Navy cruiser, the attackers were forced to surrender. The Central Park was freed by the terrorists after this critical operation by the U.S. Navy. The UK Merchant Shipping Authority has pinpointed the Central Park's latest position in the Gulf of Aden, a key shipping route 60 kilometers south of the Yemeni coast, about 80 kilometers east of Djibouti and 110 kilometers northeast of Somalia. Tensions in the Gulf of Aden eased somewhat when the destroyer USS Mason, part of the U.S. Eisenhower Aircraft Carrier Strike Group, thwarted the attempted hijacking of the Central Park. However, around the same time as the hijacking attempt, 2 ballistic missiles were reportedly fired from Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, in the general direction of the USS Mason and the Central Park, but fell approximately 10 nautical miles away from the ships. This attempted terrorist attack fortunately did not cause any damage or injuries. Yemen's government in Aden blamed the country's Iran-backed Houthi rebels for the attack. But the rebels who control the capital Sana'a have denied either the capture or the missile attack. Although the Houthis, a pro-Iranian terrorist group, deny these terror attempts, there is no other threat in the region to carry out this treacherous plan. Somali pirates are not known to operate in this region. On the other hand, the terrorist attempt targeting Central Park is the latest in a series of attacks in the Middle Eastern waters since the outbreak of the war in Gaza on October 7th. Fortunately, the U.S. Navy's Eisenhower destroyer, the USS Mason, was able to thwart attempts by supporters of the pro-Iranian Houthi terrorist organization to seize the ship and launch missile attacks. Meanwhile, the U.S. military announced that the USS Eisenhower, the aircraft carrier group that includes the USS Mason, entered the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz after rescuing Central Park. Eisenhower was accompanied by the guided missile cruiser USS Philippine Sea, the guided missile destroyers USS Gravely and USS Stetham, and the French frigate Languedoc. After the tensions in the region were averted and the U.S. Navy group moved towards the Persian Gulf, the UK made a critical statement on the latest situation in the Gulf of Aden. The UK's Merchant Marine Operations Agency said in a statement that it was aware of a possible attack in southwestern Aden and urged other vessels to exercise caution. According to marinetraffic.com, ships were turning off their automatic identification system trackers. Ships are required to keep their AIS active for security reasons, but crews turn them off if they think they could be targeted. In the Central Park case, the ship had last transmitted 4 days earlier, after leaving the Suez Canal and heading south towards the Red Sea. Therefore, the UK's warnings are very important in terms of preventing terrorist activities in the region. The Zodiac Maritime has previously been targeted in the midst of a wider shadow war between Iran and Israel that has lasted for years. In 2021, 2 crew members aboard the Zodiac's oil tanker Mercer Street were killed off the coast of Oman in a drone strike assessed by the US and other Western countries to have been carried out by Iran. The British military's UK merchant marine operations had earlier warned seafarers in the Middle East that 2 black and white boats carrying 8 men in military fatigues had been spotted in the region. This means that pro-Iranian terrorist groups have been consistently targeting civilian oil tankers and transport vessels in this critical region. Taking advantage of this chaotic situation, the pro-Iranian Houthi terrorist organization has been attempting to hijack civilian oil and shipping vessels, as well as missile and drone attacks on Israel through the Red Sea. But Iran, which supports the Houthis, has forgotten one detail. U.S. naval assets provide Israel with a strong air defense capability, not only against hijackings but also against missile and drone attacks from Yemen, with destroyers in the Red Sea. Last time, you may recall, the U.S. Navy managed to thwart such terrorist activity by the Houthis. The USS Thomas Hoodner, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, shot down several one-way attack drones in the Red Sea. The U.S. Central Naval Command reported that the drones were launched from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. In sum, neither Iran nor pro-Iranian terrorist forces can stand against Israeli-U.S. cooperation and solidarity in the Middle East, the Eastern Mediterranean, or the Red Sea. All pro-Iranian terrorist attack attempts are thwarted by Israel's biggest supporter, the United States, as was the case with the Central Park ship. In other words, no matter how hard the Tehran government tries, all these events show us that it will not be possible to create a pro-Iranian order of terror and chaos in the Middle East. It is expected that this situation will not change in the coming days, and that the U.S.-Israeli cooperation will once again bring order to the Middle East, away from the terrorist networks that Iran is trying to establish.